Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Blockchain Ireland Week. This is a panel discussion as part of Blockchain Ireland Week. And the topic for the discussion today is blockchain and the opportunity for Ireland. And we're joined by a panel of stakeholders from the Irish tech ecosystem to discuss how Ireland can position itself as a true centre of excellence for blockchain. This session is being recorded for later review, just to make people aware. And my name is Paul Hearns, and I'll be your host and moderator today. So I'm joined by our panelists, Una Fitzpatrick, Shane Nolan, John Durcan, Tony Shannon, and Paul Healy. So fairly well-known figures in the Irish technology scene. So Una is director for Technology Ireland with a background in STEM as well as business management. And she's been with Technology Ireland for more than 6 years, and she was appointed director in 2018. Paul is chief executive of Skillnet Ireland, and he's an expert in enterprise and labour market policy and corporate governance and public affairs with more than 20 years of executive level experience spanning both public and private sectors. Tony is head of digital services in the office of the government CIO. And Tony has a medical background from UCD and has worked in emergency medicine and informatics across Ireland, the UK, and the US for more than 20 years. He's highly skilled in change and digital development programs. John is senior technologist with Enterprise Ireland, where he's focused on machine learning, AI, cybersecurity, blockchain, data ethics, and privacy, and assists companies on their digitization journeys and offering guidance and explaining supports from Enterprise Ireland. Shane is head of technology and emerging business with IDA Ireland, and he assists companies and emerging businesses to understand how Ireland could be a resource as they expand and grow. Since joining IDA in 2003, he has helped companies from Sao Paulo to Sydney in leveraging Ireland as part of their international growth. So our format today is very much a discussion, a conversation. So as you look at the bottom of your screen, attendees will see a Q&A function there. So please do jump in with your questions. We'll invite questions and comments and insights throughout, but we have a bit of a round robin in terms of some discussion points, and then later on we'll come directly to the Q&A. So please do jump in. And as I said, we're looking for insights and comments as much as questions. But just to start with, we're going to go around and have each of our panelists give a little bit more in terms of their background, their roles and responsibilities in terms of their organization, and how that brings them to blockchain and gives them a view. We'll then ask them in turn again for their views and on the opportunities, and then again on challenges, and then what their focus areas will be in the coming months and years in terms of what needs to be done for Ireland to achieve that centre of excellence status. So with that, as I said, we're going to do a little bit of a round robin for a little bit more in-depth from each of our panelists, and a little bit more in terms of what brings them to blockchain and what they see there. So Una, if I could invite you first to give us a little bit more and your perspective, please.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and it's lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. So just to introduce myself, I'm the Director of Technology Ireland, which is the trade association within IBEC that represents technology companies. We're over 220 members, and that's really made up of, leading FDI companies as well as a very strong cohort of Indigenous Irish technology companies as well. I suppose in terms of, my own role, as well as being involved with Technology Ireland and IBEC, I'm also an executive board member of Digital Europe, which is a pan-European trade association, which focuses on a huge number of tech issues, one of which obviously is blockchain as well. And I suppose my main perspective in terms of blockchain, I must confess, definitely on the non-technical side of things. But I suppose my role is in regarding to lobbying and policy, and I suppose really at a national and an EU level, really with an eye to kind of what's coming down the tracks from an EU level, influencing what's happening on an EU level, and then it's ultimately its transposition and implementation from an Irish context. So we're obviously, very keen to be involved in any discussions that impact any part of the tech sector at a European or Irish level. So it's fantastic to be here today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Paul, if I could maybe come to you next.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon to all our viewers. And as Una said, it's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about the work of Skillnet Ireland, how we're supporting blockchain, but other technologies also. Just quickly, Paul, I just want to familiarise the audience once again with the work of Skillnet Ireland. The task the government set for us is to boost the competitiveness, the innovation, the productivity of businesses that are based here in Ireland. And we do this, of course, through talent development. So everywhere you look now, talent is taking centre stage. But for us here in Ireland, it takes on an added significance and an added dimension. Why? Because to a large extent, we compete as a country on the basis of our talent. So for example, we rank second in Europe for higher education attainment. We feature prominently at the top of the rankings for the productivity of our workforce. We've built up this great domain knowledge and sectoral knowledge on the basis of industries and multinationals that have been with us in this country going back 50 years. And added to all of that, we have a well-developed R&D and skills ecosystem, to use that term, of which Skillnet Ireland play a really critical role in. So we're not a country that's rich in natural resources, but we are very rich in terms of human capital. But that's an advantage we can never cede. So as we look forward, all of us who have a stake in this, government, companies and workers themselves, all of us have to double down on our efforts to boost the skills of the workforce and to ready us for the future of work. And that is really what focuses Skillnet Ireland and where our work is dedicated to do. So this year we'll provide programs to over 20,000 businesses, and we'll make a total investment of 70 million in Ireland's workforce. And some 24 million of that will come from companies in the private sector in terms of co-investment. So just some quick observations. If I'm thinking about the future of work, I'm thinking about the future of talent, and I'm looking at this from an Ireland perspective, which is what this panel is all about. And in my opinion, there are two forces going to shape all of this. The first is the role of talent in defending our economic model, Ireland's economic model. And as we all know, there is a global movement towards harmonization of corporation tax, and talent will play a central role in compensating for any changes that might arise there. So Skillnet Ireland, we're heavily involved in this agenda. We work really closely with partners like IBEC, Technology Ireland, IDA, the Higher Education Institutes, and many others. And what we're doing is supplying that high-end talent, those future skills, to the major FDI companies that are based here, helping them to meet with that demand. Then thinking about the second factor, Paul, and to the audience here and to the panel, the second factor that is shaping the future of work for our country here is, of course, technology. And in particular, these emerging technologies, data science, AI, automation, advanced computing, and of course, blockchain. So if I could stress at this point, and I'm sure it'll come up at the panel again as we talk through it, talent and emerging technologies are utterly interlinked. They are joined at hip and they are entirely codependent. So if you take, for example, in any emerging technology, you could start with blockchain. Typically, these are seeded out of the R&D system or the higher education system in the first place. Then they're developed and handed into companies, and great leaders and developers bring them on. They're applied to sort of real world challenges and so on. And then it takes talent, of course, to bring them to the next level and to take them to new heights. So talent is to the core of all this. It's the enabler of all of this. And Skillnet Ireland are playing quite a strategic role in bringing together companies, bringing together state agencies, bringing together the university sector to develop programs for these emerging technologies. And out of those collaborations, we're very proud of some of these leading edge programs that we've delivered in fintech, medtech, animation, biopharma, food science, and then in particular in these developing technologies and funding and delivering quick to market postgraduate programs in AI, Internet of Things, cloud, data science, and of course, Ireland's first postgraduate offering in blockchain. And that was developed and delivered in partnership with our colleagues in Technology Ireland, IC Skillnet. So we develop all of these programs by adopting what we call the triple helix model. And I'll expand on that later on in the panel. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think you've touched on a number of very interesting points there, and I think the animation industry actually is one that is often overlooked in these technology discussions, but is absolutely a hugely developing one, and one that Ireland has already achieved quite a lot in. So thank you very much. That's something we'll definitely come back to. Tony, if we could perhaps go to you next then to get your perspective, please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Tony Shannon, a medical background and digital healthcare for about 20 years before I ended up moving last year into the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, the Office of Government CIO here, to do lead on digital services. And I would say that obviously I've kind of come from the frontline background, so I know the challenges that are facing the public sector at the front line. And yet I've been involved in kind of digital transformation projects in one way or another for the last 20 years. So I know the potential of digital. There's a big complex journey ahead of us over the next 10 years, isn't there? And 2030 means that we've got to do a lot of things to improve the people's lives, as well as planetary challenges. So, and government has set itself a target of trying to digitalize 90% of its services over the next 10 years, which is obviously has been a while coming, but the time for that change is now. Obviously, blockchain is one of a number of kind of key technologies that should feed into the changes that are ahead of us. But for me, I'm trying to work out how, we land the potential of that technology that I've been kind of watching, in one way or another for the last 10 years, and trying to see how it best lands into that kind of context. So that's what I'm hoping that we'll cover today in some shape or form. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. John, if I could come to you next, please.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. Really looking forward to this event this afternoon. So myself, I'm a software technologist within Enterprise Ireland, very much focused on working with clients, helping them on their innovation and R&D journeys. A lot of that area is, as you mentioned at the start there, Paul, is a strong focus is on blockchain, machine learning, AI, and cyber. Really, it was kind of all the emerging areas that are coming out. One of the nice things, I guess, that I get to see quite a lot is the companies who are starting to use technologies in quite novel ways, and particularly like with blockchain. And so we get a lot of exposure through particularly our HPSU companies that's there. So we've had the likes of, say, Block Aviation, looking at using, for example, blockchain within the aviation sector and traceability in that. And then you start to see it in other sectors now coming in as well, in food, looking in logistics, etc. So it's quite nice. I get very broad exposure right across the client base who are starting to look at this. And it's also interesting to see that as well, understand some of the challenges that they're facing, and then also looking at the nice creative approaches that they're taking and how people are starting to use blockchain in different ways like that too. And over the years has been very interesting, from the original concept to where it was, and a very broad approach. We're now definitely starting to see a much more kind of targeted approach use as well for blockchains within industry. So very good, and looking forward to the rest.
Indeed, the aviation industry is a very good example of early applications of these technologies, because the engine manufacturers for the large airlines and the aircraft companies were pioneers of Internet of Things, as they put instrumentation on engines to monitor performance. So not only that, but unfortunately, bad experiences in terms of supply chain and counterfeit aircraft parts also meant that they had to improve their supply chain assurance as well. And it's good to see that blockchain is helping in those areas, because they certainly have the scale to properly test things for enterprise applications. So again, a very important industry for Ireland in general, and a fusion of those technologies being applied. So we'll certainly come back to that as well. So finally, Shane, if we could go to you, please.
Sure. Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Paul said earlier, my name is Shane Nolan. I head up IDA's technology and emerging business divisions. So the first group in that manages the relationship with some of the largest tech investors in Ireland, such as Apple, Intel, Microsoft, IBM, and also works to track the next wave of companies across multiple sectors in this industry. And the emerging business part of that works with high growth startups, typically between Series A and Series B funding rounds, as they either internationalize early or start to scale their teams internationally. I'm probably far from an expert in blockchain, but my interest in my current role is primarily around the evolution of the underlying tech, and specifically new technologies that address some of the challenges around the underlying tech in blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, and then most specifically applications or use cases that are mainly outside distributed finance. I'm not a finance guy, and we have a financial services division that's very active in this space as well, but my focus is really on applications outside that, of which there are many, and look forward to sharing some ideas around that later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, now that we have your kind of individual perspectives in terms of where you're coming at blockchain from your respective responsibilities, I suppose if we look at the opportunities side of things, so there are opportunities in terms of economic development, there are opportunities in terms of individual businesses, as well as particular sectors. So as John has pointed out, the aviation sector and logistics in general is very much relying on this. But what I think we're certainly learning from the range of companies that we're speaking to this week as part of Blockchain Ireland Week is just how widespread the adoption of this as an infrastructural layer of technology is. So maybe, John, if I could come back to you first in terms of the opportunities, and then maybe we'll get Shane and Una in terms of those business perspectives. But then we'll come to Tony in terms of how government and public service is looking on the opportunity to develop that new range of digital services. And then we'll come to Paul for the final one on this in terms of how do we get that human capital organized for this. So John, if we could maybe get that sort of industry perspective first.
Yeah, so when I look at blockchain, there seems to be like a lot of more opportunities coming out. But originally we went through blockchain will be the answer to everything. And, we all knew that wasn't going to be the case, but the hype cycle goes like that. But really over the last, I would say particularly in the 18 months, we've really started seeing much more kind of focuses and businesses going in particular niche areas where blockchain has particular usage. As for example, like that one with Block Aviation, where they were very much focused on traceability on the whole airline maintenance industry. And as you said, very important for Ireland. But again, that's a really nice, clever example. They went for one specific area, they went in to address it, and they were bringing the advantages of blockchain, which is traceability, the immutability. You've got also like cutting out all the paperwork. And that feeds in very much, I think, as companies start out on the digital transformation journeys now that they're going to be going on over the next few years. And when you're looking at ways you're going to bring in technology to kind of help replace a lot of the manual processes, a lot of that auditing processes in there, I think we're going to start seeing more and more opportunities within that as well for blockchain to start to fit into little niches along the way. And I suppose in Enterprise Ireland side of that, we're very interested, particularly in the HPSU side, where somebody comes up with a really novel approach for doing something, comes into us, makes the business case. We do it through the investments, but also with other VCs and that as well. And we see that as kind of a nice way to kind of encourage development within the sectors right across it. And we're always looking for somebody who's got a different approach to it. And really has said, look, we're addressing this problem and there's a real fit for blockchain within that. Whereas if they can't identify a fit, you do question that. But where there is something that's really value add and you can see where that's going, that's it. And definitely we've seen it like logistics, there's companies starting to look at that. We've also seen it now with our larger companies. They're also now starting to explore blockchain within their traditional business and opportunities that can come in there, and they're bringing that into their R&D cycle now as well. So so very much it's starting to become part embedded within industry. And I think over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see that grow. The knowledge is there. There's now more use cases out there. And I mean, Blockchain Ireland has really kind of helped to show that in the way that's out there with that. And that's really, those things for industry, I think is important. And seeing that grow would be where we would encourage it quite actively. So all new ideas and looking at very practical uses for it and where they can deliver a value add to the business. That's the key focus we would be looking at.
Very good, very good. Shane, do you want to come in on that then in terms of as I said, the fact that we have so many good use cases now, but even more are emerging, and they're emerging from a lot of areas that might not necessarily have been associated with such a deeply sort of I suppose cutting edge technology. So one of our key startups in Blockchain Ireland and the startups group is the Origin Chain Networks, which is bringing in agricultural applications for this as well, which again is very important for Ireland. So what's your perspective in terms of the opportunities?
Sure. Yeah, like I think most of the traffic that we've seen maybe over the past 5 years certainly has been in financial services, be it cross-border payments with the work that Citi's doing, remittance management with the work that Circle is doing, and trade finance with the more recent investment from TradeIX. But I think the point you make about supply chain provenance is a really interesting one. Like I think a lot of most of the future use cases or applications that we're seeing is around supply chain provenance. And this probably makes most sense for high margin products where the value is tied to the provenance, such as, life sciences products, be it biologics or small molecule drugs, but certainly high value agriculture, as you alluded to, Paul, and luxury goods. I think most folks on this call are probably aware that MasterCard Lab in Dublin are already working with supermarket partners to pilot blockchain technology to give the consumer visibility of supply chain provenance for their food, both from a quality and an ethical sourcing perspective. And we have a luxury goods client as well, currently working with a technology partner in Ireland as well to demonstrate or provide provenance visibility to customers for products right throughout the value chain. I think real estate is another one that's looking really interesting. And I know Miles Clark from CBRE is presenting on real estate tokenization in another session later on. So I'll focus more on some interesting opportunities that we're seeing in this space around land governance. And this is probably more of a kind of NGO type of opportunity, but certainly opportunities in Ireland for the underlying technology. So there's a big opportunity in developing countries to transform land governance, where registries or the ownership details of land are incomplete or in many cases don't exist. And there's one client of IDA's, Overstock.com, and their subsidiary Medici Ventures in Sligo, who are working with the governments in Zambia and Rwanda to develop blockchain-based land registries, which enables essentially farmers that are more or less on the poverty line to now have certainty on the ownership of their land, and then to be able to use that land as an asset and raise credit against it, or be able to borrow money securitized on the land to invest in it. So real opportunity for land governance applications of blockchain to really transform the economic reality for a lot of folks in developing countries. Other area that we see an opportunity in, although probably needs some more regulatory progress before it's fully realized, is around legal and smart contracts. I think folks again on the call might have seen the UK Jurisdiction Task Force and the UK Law Commission have issued a call for evidence around smart contracts to understand the opportunities and the risks. And that happened late last year. But I think, post-Brexit, because Ireland is now the last remaining common law jurisdiction within the European Union, there's a real opportunity for Ireland to embrace this technology and be seen as both an enforcement and a arbitration and litigation hub for issues around smart contracts. And then last area that we see emerging is around distributed identity management. More from I suppose, ability to use multiple services and access to identity management around that. But I think in the near future, the holy grail of being able to monetize our own personal data can probably only be delivered through a blockchain identity management process.
Indeed, and this idea of self-sovereign identity is a recurring theme throughout and being come at from several angles by different presenters. So a hugely interesting topic there, and something I think we'll get Tony to speak on maybe when we come to him. But Una, if I could get your perspective then in terms of the opportunities, again, just that sort of broad range, where do you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we can see clearly from what John and Shane were saying, some great examples of some homegrown, fantastic companies that are really, taking off and developing. And also then that ecosystem helps and supports the role, I suppose, that the IDA have in terms of attracting, growing and developing blockchain companies into Ireland. I suppose in terms of, what we work on in this space, and I suppose where the opportunity is for Ireland is really in the regulatory space to be leaders. And I suppose that's something we do a lot in terms of our lobbying calls, is for Ireland to be really a leader at a European level on all digital issues. So again, that's right at the top level from government ministers, officials, attaches, right throughout all our MEPs, that there's a good awareness of what the issues are. I suppose what we have seen, and don't directly work on a lot of blockchain related policies, but on areas that would have unintended consequences potentially for the sector. So be that things around data transfers, the data governance acts that's going through at the moment, the digital services package, obviously a lot of debate on data localization, data sovereignty at a European level. So I suppose what we try and do is very much the Irish voice is very much against any sort of protectionist type regimes on a European wide basis, and really that we want Europe and Ireland especially to be really open and innovative and able to operate in a very globalized context, which obviously is what blockchain is all about. So I suppose in terms of really making sure that all stakeholders and policymakers really understand what blockchain is, I think it can be at some levels very easily kind of, oh, it's that crypto thing, and they kind of just define it as that. And obviously with the examples we're hearing today, it's so much more than that. And the opportunities for business, and obviously you'll get the pushbacks in terms of energy and sustainability. And I think all those issues will work through. But I suppose it's to ensure that any of the new policies coming through aren't at the detriment or at the stifling of innovation at a European or Irish level. And that's really the opportunities for Ireland to be a leading voice on those issues, and to, maybe push back against some naysayers or more maybe conservative approaches.
Very, very good points, and certainly the sustainability element is something that we have addressed very specifically in terms of our format, because one of the things that came out as we were speaking to the various speakers was the fact that in the business application of blockchain, it's very much different to the traditional approach the crypto approach. So even the way that the blockchain is operated results in a very different pattern of consumption, and consequently a lot of those worries are negated. But again, that needs to be brought to the conversation and to the wider audience. But Tony, if we could talk in terms of the public sector view and government, you mentioned the ambitions in terms of digitization over the coming years, and obviously with a growing population that's increasingly digitally literate, that will be important. So where do you see that sort of infrastructural application of blockchain, and what are your opportunities there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, personally speaking, I would say that infrastructure is the key word I'd start with there, in the sense that, blockchain, from my knowledge of it and from what I've seen of it, it's not in the areas of quick fix. But if you look back at the electrification of this country in the 1930s, that was a huge piece of infrastructure that obviously laid the groundwork for this country to be transformed thereafter. I think if we're talking about the digitalization of the public sector of this country now, as we approach this decade, then the question is, how can blockchain provide part of that infrastructure for the long term that provides for a more trusted infrastructure for engagement between citizens and state and market players that may be in question at times. And I think blockchain, for if you think about the distributed ledger technology, it's that trusted infrastructure that you would hope would be one of the opportunities here. I think if you then take into thinking about the applications that you would build on that infrastructure, identity's been mentioned obviously, and self-sovereign identity, as you mentioned already, is probably one of the ones that strikes me as having significant potential. We're all big concerns about our data, where our data sits, the ownership of our data, big tech versus, owning your data yourself, and the self-sovereign identity ledger technology again may help with bridging the challenges there. Certainly it's an opportunity. And I think then the final one I'd mention would be around, digital government issued credentials, in the sense that, government is understood as a trusted party. And obviously people are talking to us about how you can move from paper-based credentials to digital credentials. And so blockchain technologies would seem to have a lot of potential there, with concepts like zero knowledge proof and so on. So I think these are all areas where there is real opportunity in terms of infrastructure, identity, and credentials. But there's a way to go to seeing these things implemented for real, and that's the challenge ahead of us.
Very good, and we've already seen that Ireland has made progress in those areas with the EdQ project and it going live in terms of educational credentials. So already we've seen good work being done there. But Paul, if I could come to you then in terms of the opportunities from that sort of skills and human capital perspective. There's already been great work done, but in that context of Ireland being a leader, what do you see as the opportunities?
Yeah, so look, I suppose I'd apply my answer to blockchain, but I would also apply it to all the emerging technologies, Paul. So I think the first thing you have to say is, emerging technologies are called that for a reason. That's because they're rich, they're deep, they're changing, and their application is evolving all the time. So that's the first thing. So the system, in inverted commas, has to be able to keep pace with that in terms of developing programs, developing higher education provision, whatever it may be, to keep up with these evolving technologies. So that's the first point. And there are three stakeholders to that. First, of course, is the government and the state. The second are companies stroke workers. And the third is the education and training system, particularly the higher education system. So if you could just picture that triangle for a second. And, Ireland is small is beautiful, as we know, but small is often agile. We can get things moving with reasonable agility on these questions in Ireland. But sometimes it takes something to instigate it, and it takes an agency to instigate it. And often that could be us, for example, particularly in things like these skills for emerging technologies. And probably the easiest way, Paul, is to just walk through an example. So, in any given year, we'd hold over probably about 15% of our funding, and we direct that towards what we call future skills, our future dynamics, as we call the program. And how we do that is, we're collaborating now with 73 industry groups, industry sectoral bodies and SME clusters and so on. So 73 partners in total. We're talking together all the time. We're listening to what they hear in terms of their relationships and connections with companies. And we're very much an intermediary to say, okay, here's what companies are seeing. Here's how these new emerging technologies are landing. Here are the opportunities. We're distilling that back to government, and finding ways to direct funding towards them. So through that dialogue, in any given year, we'll probably put out 2 call for proposals, to do with future skills and particularly future technologies. And at that point, we've had good conversations with our partners. We've a good sense of what they think this looks like. We get proposals then from our partners, which we evaluate, and then we apply seed funding. So that seed funding is used to develop programs that don't exist. So where there's a gap in existing provision. So our partners, just like Technology Ireland, ICT Skillnet, will then use that seed funding to work with their member companies, but also to work with the university sector to gather requirements, to create that ideation, and then ultimately the output of that is a program, a level 8 program or postgraduate program of some kind. So that in summary is the triple helix. This model of bringing together the state, the employers, the companies, and the training and education system, but particularly higher education. And the role that we play is as an intermediary, curating all of that, instigating it and curating it, and applying the funding. So we applied the seed funding for the development of it, Paul, and then we provide delivery funding, if you like, for these programs ongoing. And look, and what does all that mean? So if you look at the positions that we've taken in the likes of AI, blockchain, but also in medtech, in animation, and in many others, we're seeing literally hundreds hundreds of postgrad graduates arriving into our companies, being developed through the Skillnet Ireland system with our partners, and and very much around these emerging technologies. So what that is a huge talent shot in the arm. It's a huge boost. It's given us a competitive edge that we're able to provide through the Skillnet model. We're able to provide that level of high-end, high-tech postgraduates. You know, lots of countries just can't do it. We're able to do it, and I'm not being conceited when I say Ireland are good at this, but we're able to do it due to that smallness that I talked about. You know, I won't say it's perfect agility because no system is perfectly agile, but it's reasonably agile, and we can respond to these demands, these emerging technologies, get these future skills programs out there so that these opportunities can be really seized upon by companies, because they won't be seized upon if the skills aren't there. So that just give you a sense of that triple helix and bringing it to life. So I think if I was to speak about the opportunity is more of that. Okay, in summary, how do we do that with greater frequency, greater intensity? You know, how do we work towards an even leaner, agile, response to emerging technologies, like the case study I've just walked you through there?
Okay, well, that's a very good way to move on to our next point to go around, and maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah.
That's absolutely sounds fantastic. So in the next kind of 18 months to 3 years, what are the key kind of focus areas? Is it scaling that effort up, or is it developing it further? Are there going to be other strands that can be brought in? Because one of the things that struck me in terms of going through and developing the program this week has been, you could easily substitute the term quantum computing for blockchain, and you could possibly do all this over again maybe next year. You know, so is your focus all of those things, or are there particular areas that need build out first?
Yeah, I think it's I won't say it's all of them, but it's many of them. You know, just if we step back from it, you know, there are plenty of very effective, very capable state agencies and superb universities working with industry to develop these future skills programs that we describe here for emerging technologies. And as I said earlier on, wrapping around all that is a pretty robust R&D system. So I suppose what I'm saying there is that we have a very good infrastructure. Okay, so the question is what we do with it. And an example I would use here, Paul, is if you look, for example, at how a rapid system was developed, a rapid vaccine development system came about over the last 6 months. It's incredible. So historically, these have been 3-4 year sorts of timelines that were compressed into 2 or 3 months. And from that now, the globe, the world has a template for doing things in a really agile way that are complex, that are multi-stakeholder in how they're composed, that are high stakes, that require speed and agility and so on. So there's a template now is being established through rapid vaccine development that we've seen in the last 3 or 4 months. So it can be done, and it definitely can be done in a country of this size, where we have the infrastructure, we're agile, and we're responsive, but we can turn that into a very lean machine, to use that term, by bringing the actors together. That role that we play has been very key in all of this, but making sure that the actors are talking to each other, government, companies, and the higher education system, that it's very harmonized and lean in how it's tackling these opportunities, not problems, how it's meeting the skill supply and the graduate supply that these technologies demand.
Very good. Okay, John, I'll come to you next, but just a reminder to our audience there. I see there's a question in the Q&A already, so we're just going to go around and get people's kind of focus area next in the commentary. But please do jump in, and we'll tackle the questions then, because I'm conscious that we're coming up on time as well. So, John, in terms of your focus in the nearer term.
Yeah, so I guess particularly I suppose from an enterprise Ireland perspective, we really are trying to focus on companies and give them supports where we can to help them to kind of develop that. So we've a number through our R&D supports, for example, that are out there. We have a new offering now through our business innovation and agile, which is very much kind of focus on short-term projects, but ones that can deliver change within the business or different ways of doing it. And the introduction, for example, blockchain into that and helping kind of automation processes is a really good fit. And it's a nice way where we can help fund up to 50% of an implementation or something like that. So those type of supports of what we're looking at. We also do a lot of work there with the third level. And we've again some supports over collaboration, and we'd always encourage that, particularly with companies, for example, who are starting out in blockchain or looking at it, like leveraging the third level as a way to get in and get an understanding. And we've got supports there. So we'd often encourage companies to really explore that as a nice introduction that goes in there. And of course, then with ICT Skillnet, we're always aware about the training and the programs going on there. And I suppose one of the big things that I've definitely seen talking to companies is that kind of skills gap and that challenges around it. So again, having those supports and trying to encourage people to start going on, doing the short courses, getting some staff skilled up on it. Again, that's all part of it. And once again, we have some supports we can help on that area too. So I suppose from an Enterprise Ireland perspective, what we really want to do is put the message out there that if you've got an idea around blockchain, and if it is something, be it from the HPSU side, you're within your business and you want to change it, that you want to look at it, or if you're looking to explore it and you want some help through the third level to do that, we're there to try and help and support that where we can within the businesses that's there. And we really would like to try and encourage people to see nice creative ideas coming out and drive the innovation. And following on from Paul is like, now, there's a culture here to do it, and we want to really be there to support that in any way that we can.
Great, thank you. Shane.
Yeah, very similar sentiment to John. Like, I think blockchain, and John alluded to this earlier, was seen as the panacea, to a lot of challenges. And in following the kind of standard Gartner hype cycle, we're now kind of maybe out the trough of disillusionment, but there's still a kind of educational and promotional element I think needed. And, from an IDA perspective, we'll continue to promote kind of use cases are really interesting projects that our clients like Overstock, MasterCard, Deloitte, Fidelity, and Citi are doing here. But also, the work that Paul and the Skillnet's team are doing, making sure that our clients are aware of that, because, a number of speakers said, skills is a key element of this. And, once we start accelerating more quickly out of the trough of disillusionment, that the skills demand is going to increase significantly. So, from our perspective, we probably see that in two categories. One is there'll be a big demand for blockchain developers very, very soon. And I think the masters in blockchain that Paul and his team have developed is going to be a real answer to that challenge. But also, I think there's an educational and I suppose an awareness that Skillnets have a role in supporting as well, just to help business owners and process owners understand the potential for blockchain. And we've been working with Skillnets and some other stakeholders to co-develop a transform program, which is a broader digital transformation training program that makes business owners aware of the technology opportunities that are out there to transform their business. Blockchain is a key part of that. So I'd say, to summarize, it's evangelizing, getting people to forget about the 2015 perspectives on things. It's a more realistic perspective on blockchain now, but it has a firm basis. It's based on real projects, real impact, and we have an education system and a workforce education platform in Skillnets to help people, realize that the opportunity of blockchain that's now more ripe than it ever was.
Very good. Tony, if we could come to you next, and then we'll go to Una.
Sure. I'd say that, I'm glad to hear that the hype cycle has been mentioned, because I think that is, the issue that needs to be put out on the table here. I think, when we look at the opportunities and the way to focus it, I think it's about being pragmatic about finding a trusted technology that we can work on to tackle something like self-sovereign identity that doesn't tie us into proprietary technology and is reasonably standards-based. And that begets the question around interoperability in this sector. And I think that's one of the areas, I'd like I mean, if Ireland could be leading in any area in terms of a kind of a commons approach to this and was showcasing interoperability in blockchain technologies, I think that would be a bit of a game changer, because right now I don't have, you know, the feeling that interoperability is just strong enough in the sector, and without it, you know, we're not going to be able to get the distributed approach to things like identity that we really need. So I would say we'll be looking for technologies that are open source, perhaps certainly open standards based, that are their proven ability to interoperate with other vendors, so we're not tying people into particular vendors. But if we can crack those kind of issues for something like identity or credentials, then I think we're onto a very interesting basis of an ecosystem that could then be formed out of that. But those issues around interoperability and openness are key. The only other one I'd mention are we need to be careful about the environmental credentials of the technology. You know, we don't want technology that's burning a hole in the planet. So that's also part of the challenge here, and we need to build that into our experimentation and our R&D plans, I think, so that we seem to be doing it in a green way.
Thank you. Una, it's touched on some of the areas you were talking about there in terms of shaping policy, but regulation, standards, things like that as well. So is that all feeding into your focus areas in the coming time?
Absolutely, and I think the most upcoming kind of development here will be the National Development Plan, which I suppose is expected in June in the coming weeks, and I suppose leading out of that, then the Recovery and Resilience Funds from the EU, and obviously 20% of those have to be allocated to digital projects. So I think to pick up on what Tony said around kind of identity and government issued credentials, I was on a call yesterday with MEPs, and I think they kind of said that there was concern that if there was the European Digital Green Certificate for travel within the EU, that Ireland, you know, because we don't actually have kind of that national identity system in place, may be slower than other jurisdictions. So I do think that's, I suppose, it might highlight the need for that sort of technology to be in place at a government level. And I suppose, you know, it may actually inadvertently accelerate some of the things that I suppose maybe Tony and his colleagues have been calling for some time, because the two are very much linked. And I suppose somebody said yesterday, you know, don't ever let a crisis go to waste. So if that is what comes out of it, well, then that'll be a positive, I think. And I would hope then, you know, that the learnings out of that, both on a national, and again, this is very much a society-based conversation, because, you know, people have to feel comfortable and have trust in the systems that are put in place. So I think if Ireland can roll out something like that people and individuals have trust in, it means that the future adoption and the, you know, future possibilities here, you know, will be far more embraced than maybe they previously might have been.
Okay. Well, just a reminder to the attendees and the audience again, I see some questions coming in there, so please do jump on that now, and we'll go to the questions. So there's a question coming in from Colin there, who asked about, I'm curious to hear how we can take advantage of blockchain to enable paperless trade. This is especially applicable with Brexit and how it affects our trade. So maybe if we could go to Shane first, perhaps, on that, and then to John, and then anybody else. But I would say your respective briefs will probably give us some good insights on this, because I know paperless trade and the ability to have the kinds of international certifications and documentation necessary for cross-border trade, both intra-EU and beyond, are becoming increasingly important. So Shane, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. And you know, I think we were leaders in this space, believe it or not. You know, nearly 5 years ago, you know, probably one of the first blockchain-based trade arrangements was between which is, you know, the Dairy Board, as most people remember it by, and the Seychelles Food Company, using a technology from an Israeli company called Wave, which is a blockchain-based digital letters of credit platform. But you know, I think the expectation at the time was that the floodgates would open in terms of blockchain being the basis for most international trade, that it was a no-brainer. But I think what it showed us, and I'm kind of reminded of comments that the Minister for Finance made yesterday, is international acceptance is going to be key. It's one thing, you know, an early mover country embracing this technology and being first movers. But if it's not widely accepted on the other side of your trade, well, then you have a problem. And, I was struck by Minister Dunne yesterday said, when it comes to policy, we have to be aspiring for global policy. And Tony touched on this with standards, global standards, global policy in Ireland needs to be monitoring that. If we decide to design everything ourselves, we're the only person in the village with the telephone. So I think it has to be collaborative. And to Una's point about influencing, we have a Minister for Finance now that heads up the Eurogroup, and there's a very active blockchain conversation happening there. But I think intra-EU is a good starting point for broad acceptability of blockchain for trade deals. But I think it shows the fact that the technology and the interest and that the desire is only part of the equation. Acceptability and policy is a key enabler.
Very good, very good. John, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, and very much, I suppose, follow what Shane, he said, there's a lot of other moving parts to it. Very much so, I suppose, from the opportunity side there, particularly around that, if you think about what blockchain does exceptionally well, that traceability, the pieces that's in there, or for example, with smart contracts and opportunities there, where you could automate certain sequence of events, particularly in multi-channel operations that's coming through, or from supplier to supplier and moving across borders, and that kind of chain of events with things that kick in along the way. There's synergies there around doing it now, and then the complexity then of the real world comes in within that, that getting that buy-in, as we talked about. I think companies who are looking into doing stuff in that, it would be very important as well to look at bodies such as the NSAI, and they have a lot of standards bodies. And for example, you could get in as a very small company and be as a voice on setting an international standard, and then you have that built into your product from the start, and you've got credibility. And I think people sometimes don't realize, but actually there's quite a lot of power in that sense, because you're in there at the top table in essence. Each country has one vote to put in for a standard, and you're in there able to influence and direct where you want your standard to kind of go and help that. So I think if there's companies particularly looking in with this around the blockchain side, and they are looking at that broader interoperability side, particularly around, is maybe reach out to NSAI. Have they got some groups there around this particularly focus on standards in this particular area? Can they get involved? And then seeing how that then fits into their product as well. Because I think it's that broad acceptance is what's going to drive it. And particularly something like Brexit is a good example for that.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, there's a question here in terms of skills. So, would the panel agree that the inclusion of basic blockchain elements in existing non-technology level 8 programs, for example, finance, might be viable or helpful? So, Paul, I think if you want to come in on that one first.
Yeah, I will. I suppose the first thing I'd say is probably, I'm sure it's come up during the week, or will come up in the week during the week, is this, I suppose, a slightly contentious sort of aspect, if you like, to blockchain, and the role of awareness building and dealing with it. And that is, I suppose, interpretations or legacy, whatever you want to call it, of blockchain to things, to issues of data security, into issues of crypto and so on. So there's a role of the blockchain community, to the extent that exists, and that's what this week is all about, and I suppose general awareness building on this, and demystifying it. And look, I really, we would commend the likes of the work that Joyce O'Connor is doing on this, that Dave Feenan and others are doing on it, who are joining the dots on this and beginning to think about more public awareness as to what blockchain is and isn't, and and demystifying it. And as part of that, it's to give it a plain English explanation. So if you talk to a man or woman on the street and you say, what is AI, they'd give you a decent crack at it. I would have thought. What is cloud? Equally, what is blockchain? Is tough. It's a hard one to plain English. So I think that would definitely be helpful. I think, to the specific question, the role of blockchain modules in kind of programs, undergraduate programs, I suppose I'd have an open mind in it. I think it would be at a point, I think, where we see as a technology real maturity, where it, it is, and it's coming well out of emerging technology, it is, but when it is a real force, that's a permanent force, it's an evolving force and so on, I think then, yeah, it should be looked at in the context of undergrad and postgraduate provision.
Very good. Okay. Well, I'm just going to jump on to the next question then, because we are coming close on time, and we still have two more questions on the board. So it's someone is asking, following Tony and Shane's point, do we need to start breaking away from the fully decentralized, unsustainable proof of work to proof of authority? And does Ireland need to initiate this? So this is something that has come up on a number of occasions, and previously we heard from a government services speaker in Slovenia about a change from proof of work to proof of stake that significantly reduced the energy consumption. So are these things that are being looked at in terms of how it's being deployed here? Maybe John, would you be able to comment on that first?
So as in, definitely in the sense that it would make sense to start looking into that. And have I seen anybody doing that particularly? Say, not off the top of my head now. I'm just trying to think about where there's been a move into that space. Not immediately just comes to mind. But I notice that some have started at least looking at that aspect of it and see what other alternatives are in there. And you know, you are seeing like Hedera and their hash graph and different kind of techniques that are coming out and other technologies around it. So yes, I'd agree in principle that there should be something around that, but I'm trying to think of somebody who might have actually started doing that just now off the top of my head.
Okay, Shane, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, again, probably beyond my technical awareness, but yeah, like I think all of the technical challenges with blockchain infrastructure we would see as opportunities. Like there is an opportunity there, you know, and the core company's name escapes me, that's looking at more energy efficient approaches to mining is a case in point. Like for every one of the technical challenges there is a business opportunity. I think you know, a combination of, you know, where we are in the hype cycle combined with naysayers mean that everybody sees these challenges as reasons why blockchain isn't, you know, a suitable technology. I think we're going to find, once people kind of shake themselves from where they are in the cycle, you'll find people are going to apply capability and indeed research time to addressing some of these. Like I think there's probably going to be a difference between technologies deployed for proof of concept and technologies deployed for mass rollout as well. And I think just because the proof of concept doesn't scale, the technology doesn't scale, doesn't mean that it's not useful to prove as well. So yeah, I'd be maybe concerned if we kind of see it as an either or. I think there are various methodologies out there. Some of them are good for proof of concept, some of them are good for scaling, but we can't throw out the proof of concept stuff just because it doesn't scale.
Okay, Tony, do you want to just comment briefly on that one? And I just point out that there are some resources and references being shared there in the chat, so you can look up on that in terms of some of the methodologies there. But Tony, do you want to just comment on that change?
I don't really have an awful lot to add there on that one, Paul, other than, you know, anything that is done to kind of reduce the energy effort involved is to be welcomed, I think. And I think what I'm hearing is that obviously we're seeing in the post-hype cycle a more enlightened way of looking at how elements of blockchain can be used, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're doing it the way we would have done it 10 years ago. But otherwise, I wouldn't have anything else to add on that point. Okay,
well, unfortunately, we're just coming to the end of our time. So unfortunately, we'll have to bail. I would just like to mention though that there's on the ictskillnet.ie website, there's the skills build scheme there, and there are pathways to learning around this, and a whole new range of resources has been made available in partnership with IBM around blockchain in particular. So please do check out ictskillnet.ie for those. So it just remains then for me to thank everybody for your participation today. I hope it's given a good multifaceted presentation of the opportunities and the challenges for Ireland around this interesting topic. And thanks, of course, goes to our sponsors as well, who's made this possible. So Technology Ireland, ICT Skillnet, Accenture, and Algorand Foundation for allowing us to put on a free series of events. So please do check out blockchainireland.ie/events for the rest of today's program and for tomorrow. Thank you everybody for your participation today and for the questions from the attendees as well. So thank you everybody, and we'll hopefully see you at another event. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Paul. Take care, everybody.